Good morning. We will begin the session soon, so may I kindly ask you to all to please take your seats. Thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to declare open Committee of the Whole 1. I would like to thank you all for the trust you've placed in me as chair of the committee, and I look forward to working with all of you during our deliberations today. We shall begin by considering agenda item number 2 on the special body on least developed, landlocked developing, and Pacific Island developing countries. As you know, during yesterday's preparatory meeting, The LDCs, LLDCs, and PIDCs had a full day of extensive discussion on the main issues, concerns, and priorities of these three groups of countries. At the conclusion of these deliberations, the meeting requested its chair to present a summary to this committee. I would therefore like to request the Vice Chair of the preparatory meeting of the Special Body on LDCs, LLDCs, and PIDCs to present the main outcomes of the meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chair of the Committee of the Whole One, Madam Executive Secretary, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased and honored to present the summary of the preparatory meeting of the Special Body on least developed, landlocked, developing, and Pacific Island developing countries. As mandated by the Commission at its 69th session, the preparatory meeting of the Special Body on least developed, landlocked, developing, and Pacific Island countries was convened on 3rd August 2014. The meeting, attended by 16 member states, deliberated on the priority issues of concern to LDCs, LLDCs, and SEEDs, and adopted a set of key recommendations which are contained in document E/ESCAP/70 CRP1 placed before the Commission. I'm pleased to briefly mention a few major recommendations contained in the document before you. On development issues, the meeting stressed the need to recognize the significant diversity among and between least developed, landlocked developing, and Pacific Island developing countries and their complex development challenges in shaping policy response for this group of countries. On Pacific Island developing countries, the meeting took note of the preparation of the 3rd International Conference on Small Island Developing States, which will be held in Apia, Samoa from 1st to 4th of September 2014. In this regard, participants emphasized the development priorities of Pacific small island developing states, including economic management, addressing climate change, sustainable energy, oceans and seas, health and non-communicable diseases, and social development, including gender equality, governance, and means of implementation. The meeting encouraged high-level participation in that conference, both from Pacific small island developing states and development partners. The meeting called for the ESCAP Secretariat to support the recommendations of the Samoa Pathway, the draft outcome document for that conference, and assist member countries in its implementation and the development agenda beyond 2015, including supporting integration and implementation of the sustainable agenda in national development plans, sub-regional connectivity through support for maritime and ICT initiatives, and the promotion of climate adaptation. In this regard, the meeting called for ESCAP Secretariat to support member states in collaboration with relevant stakeholders in their commitment to ensure sub-regional coherence in policy approaches on the sustainable management of oceans and seas. In relation to the work of the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, the meeting emphasized the need for issues of particular relevance to Pacific small island developing states to be mainstreamed and taken fully into account across the work of the United Nations, development systems and for them to include within the agendas of both the Forum and the Economic and Social Council, with appropriate linkage to national and regional implementation mechanisms. On least developed countries, the meeting took note of key messages of the Cotonou Agenda for Productive Capacity Building in LDCs, the outcome document of the Ministerial Conference on New Partnership for Productive Capacity Building in LDC held in Cotonou, Republic of Benin from 28th to 31st July 2014. The meeting noted that the Cotonou Conference saw the launch of several initiatives, including International Investment Support Center for Least Developed Countries, the UN Decade for Sustainable Energy for All, for Least Developing Countries, G7 Initiative on Strengthening Assistance for Complex Contract Negotiation, and the South-South Technology Transfer Facility for Least Developed Countries. The participants noted that the Asia-Pacific least developed countries have made good progress in implementing the Program of Action for the least developed countries for the decade 2011 to 2020, known as the Istanbul Program of Action, and call on the ESCAP Secretariat to continue work with the relevant United Nations agencies to implement the regional roadmap for implementation of the Istanbul Program of Action. More so, support regional consensus building and positioning of Asia-Pacific least developed countries in key global forums and assist these countries in graduating out of the least developing country status. The meeting called on the United Nations and the development partners to support the least developed countries in formulating the need for landlocked developing countries to take effective measures to integrate trade and trade capacity building policies into their national development strategies. In this regard, the meeting called on ESCAP Secretariat to assist these countries in their effort towards strengthening human, institutional, and regulatory capacities in trade policy and trade negotiation, including in such areas as market entry and access, tariffs, customs, competition, investment, and technology. Regional integration, harmonization of customs procedures, certification and standardization requirements, identification of markets, development of trade supportive infrastructure, and establishment of institutions to strengthen supply-side capacities. The meeting took note of the second United Nations Conference on Landlocked Developing Countries, which will be held from the 3rd to 5th of November 2014 in Vienna, Austria, to shape the new development agenda for landlocked developing countries for the next decade. The meeting emphasized that this new development agenda should give priority to structural transformation, trade and transport facilitation, transit rights, and infrastructure finance. The meeting also noted the importance of mobilizing regional resources for inclusive and sustainable development of LLDCs and welcome the plans to launch the Northeast Asia Forum on Development Cooperation, engaging key donors and South-South partners in the region, including China, Japan, Republic of Korea, and the Russian Federation. The meeting called on ESCAP Secretariat to continue to assist Asia-Pacific landlocked developing countries in integrating transport modes to optimize efficiency, facilitating transport movement across borders, devising creative approaches for financing infrastructure investment, and upgrading mobility for sustainable and inclusive development. On the perspective of Asian Pacific least developed, landlocked developing countries and Pacific Island countries in the context of the development agenda beyond 2014, The meeting emphasized the development challenges faced by least developed, landlocked developing, and Pacific Island developing countries should be brought to the forefront of the post-2015 development agenda. In this regard, the meeting emphasized these countries' development priorities, including eradication of extreme poverty and hunger, promoting inclusive growth, employment generation and decent work, improving educational outcome, focusing in particular on improving the quality of education, improving health outcome, include those on non-communicable diseases, promoting gender equality and empowerment, managing demographic dynamics and urbanization, upgrading infrastructure, expanding productive capacities, increasing access to trade in products and service, and building trade facilities, promoting accountable and responsive governance, protecting natural capital, and promoting green growth and tackling climate change. Participants noted that the greatest concern faced by the least developed, landlocked developing, and the Pacific Island developing countries were external threats to sustainable development, and recognized the need for the development agenda beyond 2014, together with its targets and indicators, be contextualized within the realities of these countries. The meeting emphasized that closing the development gap and implementing a post-2015 development agenda in the least developed, landlocked developing countries and Pacific Island developing states requires significant mobilization of resources from a variety of sources and the effective use of financing. The meeting stressed the need for global monitoring and accountability framework for the implementation of the post-2015 development agenda, including the identification of responsibilities for implementing, financing, and monitoring. The meeting noted with appreciation the decision of the Secretariat for the Executive Secretary to convene a meeting of the Regional Coordinating Mechanism to further galvanize system with wide support from least developed, landlocked developing, and Pacific Island developing countries for the United Nations to deliver as one. The meeting noted with appreciation the decision by the Executive Secretary to convene a meeting in New York in collaboration with OHRLLS and to be attended by a member country's permanent representative on devising special financial mechanism for the least developed countries, landlocked developing, and Pacific Island developing countries. The meeting called on the complete implementation of all international endorsed program of action and general resolution that expressly reference to this group of countries, so as to integrate them into future development agenda. On the draft resolutions, the meeting noted with appreciation the draft resolution on the program of action for the least developed countries for the decade 2012 to 2020 in Asia and the Pacific, which was sponsored by Cambodia, and the draft resolution on implementation of the Suva Declaration on improving maritime transport and related services in the Pacific, which was sponsored by Fiji, and called on member countries to support these draft resolutions. Several least developed, landlocked developing, and Pacific Island developing countries express their support for the draft resolution. Thank you.
Thank you to the Chair of the Preparatory Meeting for your report. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we will now move to the high-level exchange on development cooperation in the post-2015 era, sharing perspectives from the Asia-Pacific least developed, landlocked developing, and Pacific Island developing countries. And our discussion today will be moderated by Ms. Shamshad Akhtar, Executive Secretary of ESCAP, and includes 5 distinguished panelists, whom I will now invite to take their seats here in the front. And it is my pleasure to invite Ms. Akhtar to moderate the high-level exchange.
Good morning. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it's my distinct honor to be moderating this distinguished panel. They represent countries with special needs, and we are fortunate to have this opportunity to benefit from their valuable experience, their perspectives, and their advice. Sitting to my first right, I am pleased to introduce His Excellency, Mr. Lee Tosh, Senior Minister, Chairman of the National Committee for ESCAP, and the Vice President of National Committee for Disaster Management of Cambodia. As Vice President of the National Committee for Disaster Management, Mr. Lee Tosh oversaw the management of the great floods that hit Cambodia in 2013. He has been instrumental in Cambodia's efforts to implement the Istanbul Program of Action, including Cambodia's offer to host the midterm review of the implementation of the Istanbul Program of Action. Sitting first to my right, it is my pleasure to introduce His Excellency, Mr. Aisake Velu Ike, the Minister of Finance and National Planning of Tonga. The Minister has served as Secretary for Finance and was Senior Advisor to the Executive Director, Southeast Asia Office of the World Bank. Sitting to my second right is His Excellency Mr. Govind Raj Pokhrel, Vice Chairperson of the National Planning Commission of Nepal. Mr. Pokhrel is an expert on energy issues, having worked in both government and private sector. He was Executive Director of the Alternative Energy Promotion Center in the Ministry of Environment and Science and Technology. Seated second to my left is His Excellency Mr. Shalom Chai Khomasat, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lao People's Democratic Republic. Mr. Khomasat was Director General of Department of International Organizations in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs before being appointed Permanent Representative of Lao PDR to the United Nations in New York from 2012 to 2013. As chair of LLDC's group, Mr. Comerset played a very crucial role in the regional review of the Almaty Program of Action for LLDCs. Last but not the least, on my far right, I'm very pleased to introduce to my colleague, distinguished Mr. Gayan Chandra Acharya, who is the Under-Secretary General and High Representative for the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. Mr. Acharya was permanent representative of Nepal to the United Nations as chair of the Global Coordination Bureau for LDCs. Mr. Acharya contributed to the successful conclusion of the 4th United Nations Conference on LDCs. He was also closely involved in the 2010 Millennium Development Goals midterm review process and the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development. So after this detailed introduction of our distinguished panelists, and also before I begin our high-level exchange, I want to specifically recognize everyone who's following us via the live webcast and Twitter. I warmly welcome you all wherever you are, and know that the wealth of experience of our panelists will enrich our perspectives in tackling forward development cooperation challenge for the benefit of our region. We have our share of vulnerable countries, and we have to do everything within our means during this post-2015 era. I also invite everyone joining us online to send their questions through Twitter to our panelists, who will provide responses to as many questions as they can before the end of the debate. Please use hashtag CS70, and our Twitter handle is @UNESCAP for your posts. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to preface our discussion by briefly outlining the basis of this high-level exchange. And in doing so, I'd like to really give you a grand tour of some of the challenges we face, but also some of the dynamic situation that we are faced with in the development cooperation scene. Of course, in discussing development cooperation topic, I'm going to confine myself to the case of special needs countries, which is the subject of today's panel. I think you're all quite familiar that in recent years there has been considerable debates on an international development cooperation framework. At the center stage of these debates have been the role of overseas development assistance, with DAC countries expected to deliver almost 0.7% of GNI. Though ODA has risen by about 6% in 2013, the decline in the preceding few years because of the global crisis has raised legitimate concerns regarding the achievements and limited scope of the development cooperation framework. More concerning for the debates in context, the concern that I have is really in context of the Sustainable Development Agenda. The key problem that we face is that ODA for least developed countries has declined by 12% in real terms in 2012. Furthermore, bilateral contributions to multilateral institutions also fell by about 7% in real terms. So why is that later item significant? Because multilateral institutions devote almost 40 to 45% of their assistance to LDCs during 2005 and 2011. So generally, the share of ODA flows to LDCs has been low. But also what is concerning is that there is a fair degree of ambiguity on the precise flows and also where the ODA is being used. I was going through the website and I noticed that DESA recently released some numbers of a very small survey that it had conducted of a few, about 16 to 17 odd countries, and it indicates that ODA allocations actually do not take into account economic vulnerabilities, which is a very important indicator of classification of LDCs. So it's unfortunate that we classify these countries in context of certain variables, but we actually do not allocate funding in accordance with that criteria. However, ODA determination is made on the basis of either historical relationships between the donor and the recipient country, and of course, for right reasons to conflict prone countries. ODA, of course, also faces this huge problem that it depends on the will of the donors in terms of the precise allocation, and we have found that there are multiple topics which preoccupy the donors rather than their assigning high priority to the infrastructure and productive sectors. And I say this because growth is really generated if you invest effectively in infrastructure and productive sectors. Let me also share with you good news that improvements in ODA delivery on grant elements has improved, and there has been, of course, less tying of aid and less emphasis on very strange type of conditionalities which were traditionally imposed. But what is unfortunate is that few bilateral donors have established LDC-specific programs, in particular technical assistance initiatives, in a holistic manner. Bilaterals, of course, have provided assistance for graduation of LDCs. We need to, however, recognize that LDCs will have to be prepared when they graduate, because this will have consequences for their access to ODA. And as such, as a part of the graduation mechanism, we are also looking at financing elements post-graduation. Like ODA, the share of aid for trade going to LDC is about 1/4 of the overall aid for trade budget, though the grant element of flows to low-income countries has been better. So what has been our experience of Millennium Development Goals, which really centered solely on ODA? Of course, there were certain other elements, but there was very high expectation on the delivery of ODA. And I'll share with you a quick 5 points before I conclude. First, to recognize the unpredictability of the official development assistance. It is compounded by the volatility in flows during the recent crisis. The modest recovery in ODA that I talked about should, however, be no cause for complacency. And retaining emphasis on meeting these targets is very critical, and this was the message that the Asia Pacific Sustainable Financing Committee outreach that we had in Jakarta agreed on. Equally important to us is the scrutiny of the ODA allocation mechanism And there is much debate that if ODA is to focus on poverty, then it may not have a high impact worldwide. And they say this is said because poor are very much concentrated in middle income countries. So there is hence a rationale for the donors to continue allocations, to diffuse the allocations and split them between really the LDCs and the middle income countries. But I'm not clear that the ODA that goes to middle income countries does indeed achieve the objective of poverty reduction. I used to be in multilateral development business, and I can tell you from my experience that the bilateral assistance that was provided and co-financed with us were largely on other considerations and mostly to support a variety of other activities. So in view of these debates, going forward, it will be prudent to adopt well-defined, simple, rules-based allocative mechanisms for ODA with appropriate ownership, of course, to country ownership and considerations, track record of effectiveness and efficiency of resource deployment, and use of funds. And I have given this message at the high-level political forum also, at the ECOSOC platform very recently, which means that, which basically emphasized that LDCs should get high priority, but LDCs should be held accountable and they should have high ownership. A second point that I wanted to share with you in light of the experience of MDG 8 work that I have done, that it is important to recognize that development financing requirements for SDGs will be enormous. And they call for, of course, broadening the global partnership, which is referring to the MDG 8. We do need a proper, newer policy and institutional mechanism for better tapping the alternate funding sources, and this will be something that we will request Mr. Acharya, being in New York, to share his thoughts with on what's going on in that area. ESCAP estimates suggest that to close development gaps, special needs countries, for example, Bangladesh and Fiji, will require on an average about 16.4% and 9.9% of their GDP respectively from 2013 to 2030. So that shows you the magnitude of effort that is warranted for SDG. Another point, my third point, that the global partnership will need to actually extend beyond official development assistance, and we have to concentrate on domestic resource mobilization, be it from tax or capital markets, to the extent there are capital markets in these vulnerable economies. And we have to encourage the global community to curb tax profit shifting practices, which is a subject of the G20, where I'm Sherpa of the UN. The emerging ambitious development agenda would inevitably call for leveraging, of course, of high-risk finance and long tenure funding requirements. And again, from my MDB's experience, I think you'd really need instruments like political risk guarantee and other forms of credit enhancement for different types of risk to be able to leverage resources for these special needs countries. This all is under deliberation in the Intergovernmental Committee of Sustainable Financing, fortunately. So, but to what extent they focus on LDCs or special needs countries have yet to be seen when the report comes, and although I will be very optimistic on that. The fourth point that I wanted to share with you was the whole story on the trade. I think our countries do need continued duty-free quota, free access, and there's need for effective trade facilitation, a subject that our colleagues are pursuing here in ESCAP. This is more critical, of course, for the LLDCs because we have to ensure the competitiveness of exports and imports. Many LDCs and even others will need assistance to implement measures and take advantage of opportunities for trade facilitation agreement offers. Global LDCs service exports such as IT-enabled business-to-business outsourcing services have grown, but they are very small still, barely 1%. And there is, of course, a lot of opportunities there, and I'm counting that there is going to be some flexibility among WTO members for service preferences to LDCs. And again, Mr. Acharya can shed some light as to whether this is indeed the case. Any market access opening opportunities for reduction in trade transaction cost will need to be accompanied by continued knowledge transfer to build the competitiveness of LDC services exporters. We of course need flexible approaches and mechanisms for international corporations because the IPR regime is not that intellectual property rights regime is not that straightforward and not very fair. So we do need to evolve science, technology and innovation on the platform of ESCAP to deal with the issues of transfer of technology and develop in-house systems for innovation. Market access in agriculture sector remains a key area, and there is indeed the broader agenda of trade. And again, I can share with you that in G20, trade is a very important topic, but I have yet to see something new evolving there. Now, my final point is also something that I thought of that is important for us to think through, is to examine the implications of this emerging regional comprehensive economic partnerships and the Trans-Pacific Partnership agreements for the special needs countries, because these are going to be mega deals and mega agreements, and they are not just going to be confined to trade, but they are going to extend on the investment side too. And having been associated with some of the BITs, the bilateral investment agreements, the legalities are very complex. So I think this is an area where ESCAP will also need to position itself to provide the required advice to the countries. So I've spoken a lot, but in conclusion, as important as the level of resources available, to me is the effective use and ownership of the countries for the use of resources. And it is important to think out of the box in designing financing arrangements for sustainable development. It is quite, we are in ESCAP very well positioned now, because our latest economic survey report has some interesting estimates on domestic resource mobilization, which should augur well and improve the prospects for our countries. So with this, I'm going to end, and thank you all for being here. This high-level exchange hopefully will offer us a key opportunity to reflect on some of the issues that I have raised, but also bring in additional perspectives from our distinguished colleagues and their specific experiences. So let me now start our exchange by inviting indeed our distinguished panelists, their experience. They have led their countries. They have negotiated these bilateral and multilateral deals. So I'm counting on this session being very stimulating and interesting. So first, Your Excellency, Mr. Lee Thuch, Cambodia remains vulnerable to external economic shocks, as it has a very narrow export base, and it has yet to achieve the kind of economic diversification required to withstand shocks. when I went to Cambodia, which is like a decade plus ago, versus what it is today. I am 100% sure that under your and the leadership, it's come a long way. So my more specific question is, what do you think the role of development cooperation should be in terms of attracting increased participation of private sector in Cambodia's economy to support its effort in graduating from its LDC status by 2020? Because we know in Asia, most of the resources do come from private sector, not necessarily from ODA, although ODA is an important leveraging tool for us. So over to you.
Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary, Excellencies Ministers, distinguished panelists. Good morning, everybody. I wish to invite you to visit Cambodia again.
We'll do so.
It's too long already to see the progress there. Of course, Madam, Cambodia needs development cooperation. Cambodia, as you know, has been through a very tough time in the past 50 years. When you spoke what happened in Cambodia in the past, let me remind you a bit about what we have been through. The ESCAP has done very good paper here. They mentioned about over the past 50 years that the region have grown up together, poverty reduction has been reduced, all this. But when you speak about Cambodia, when you speak about over the past 50 years, we have to take 30 years away, because during 30 years we did nothing. We were in civil war. Cambodia at that time had 4 governments, 4 different territories, 4 currencies. But Cambodia was only one nation, but divided by 4 factions. So, Madam, in the past 30 years, we've not been able to do anything. So only full peace, when we achieved full peace in 1998, full peace, as you know, the killing field, the Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge. So only 15 years, let's say, that Cambodia engaged in a full process of recovery, peace building, economic start to grow, and the private sector start to come in and play a role to build a future of a country. So, Madam, as a post-conflict nation, development cooperation has been key for our survival. Development cooperation plays a very important role to put an end to civil war, to put an end to the return of the past, of the genocide regime, and to let us survive and build a future. I was myself Minister for Rural Development in the early 90s, and I know how much the importance of the role of a civil society, of ODA, that helped build our country, Cambodia, today. I work with 200 over civil society organizations, NGO, who helped build my rural healthcare centers, brought in water supply to our rural poor, the rural infrastructures, all kinds. So it's very important, Madam. Development cooperation has been instrumental, been vital for the success for the future of Cambodia. Over the past 10 years, ODA was about $10 billion that helped reshape the future of our rural areas, and then move forward to create a framework that allows economic growth and the participation of private sector in our economy. So very important. Then now, private sector roles in our rebuilding. From zero exports, now we export more than 10 billion US dollars. From zero factories in the early 90s, we have 100,000 over factories and enterprises. So the private sector play a very important role in our economy, and it will change Cambodia to a better future. We has been heavily aid dependent nation. We move forward to get more revenue from our private sectors, and then to be less aid independent nation, and then we will move on to graduate as planned to a middle income nation in the future. Cambodia has been the first European countries a member of WTO, and we are proud to be, and we will move forward with private sector to build our future and hope. Thank you, Madam, for your attention.
Thank you. It's indeed unfortunate, the story of war-ravaged economies, and there are more countries in that category. Your Excellency, Mr. ICK Sake Velu Aki, international agreements and commitments by international community to improve aid effectiveness place a great emphasis on budget support as an efficient and effective way to deliver aid. What obstacles or challenges has Tonga faced in improving aid effectiveness, and what budgetary initiatives have been taken to support effectiveness of outcomes so that we can draw lessons for other countries?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for this opportunity. Talking about aid effectiveness is something that has preoccupied the business of developed corporations over the years, more than decades now. And that's a debate between donor and recipients. In terms of donor, they want to know whether the money actually goes into the systems, actually improve or achieve the desired results. That's what we call effectiveness, is using the resource in the right way to produce the right desired result. And also in terms of efficiency, they need to be delivered the ODA program in such a way that you do the right thing in the least cost. So that's the two issues that capture the interest of all of us who are involved in this business over the years. And I do realize it's important to us as well. In terms of global financial crisis, which occurred in 2008, all of us do aware, all the international community coming together and work out what sort of assistance we provided globally in such a way that the global economy will be able to recover fairly quickly. And then, of course, we realized always a gap in terms of financial resources and capacities and infrastructure in least developing countries and also SDIs, while also at the same time, the resources on the other side, developed countries. And that's where the budget support came in as far as Tonga is concerned. So when the financial crisis occurred in 2008 and 9, it affected our economy in terms of various transmissions. But the main transmission is the remittances. Of course, it's about over 30% of GDP actually comes from remittances, which of course leverage for our disposable income. With the onset of the global financial crisis, our remittances depressed, contracted down to 10 to 15%. And also at the same time, our national budget, our revenue forecast for that particular financial year contracted about 5% of our GDP. So it's a big gap that exists, and we know the implications of it nationally. And fortunately, EU was the first institution to come to us and offer to provide some sort of assistance. And that's the one who actually initiated this financial instrument, which is they call it reflex. And then, of course, we start off in make sure that we have to make sure that the donor EU is satisfied with the way we're going to use their fund, and also to make sure that the fund is actually complement what our countries try to achieve in terms of national development priorities. So we start with them, and then later comes the ADB and World Bank, and also other bilateral donors. So, but it was uttermost of our mind the issue of aid effectiveness and efficiency. And in terms of ownership has to be owned by recipient countries, and also alignment, that the assistance coming in is in line with our national priorities, and also it has to be done in a harmonious way, that the development partner has to work together to reduce the interaction cost incurred and have a fragmented requirement and also a reporting system. So we're too aware of the principle of effectiveness, and that is the driver for bringing us together at the table, both the development partner and us, to design a system that actually satisfies, or try at least to satisfy all of these principles. So we then develop a national committee within our government, which basically comprising of various implementing agencies and also from various sectors who are involved in this program, to make sure that they appreciate and also to make the commitment in terms of policy metrics we're going to develop. At the same time, we agree to focus our development of our policy metrics into 4 areas. One is the financial management system we have to enhance, and also fiscal policy, we have to make the fiscal policy sustainable, and also we have to create and improve our environment of doing business, and also improve our energy efficiency and renewables. The other 4 areas we all agree, and all with the donors, that's where the policy targets and the policy metrics will be framed. In 2012 and 2011-2012, that's the first time for all of us sit together, and the development partners agreed that the World Bank take the lead role. So the World Bank will be the judge in terms of the donor, representing them that what we are doing, the policy metric develop, and the targets satisfy their concern. And when they satisfy, the rest satisfy. So that's the thing that we experience, and I would like to record here the commitment from their side, and also from our side, knowing, the experience we had in the past, engagement we had in terms of project and progress with different donors partners. And I think also the international pressure for coming together and work out a system that serves everyone in interest, I think also have a positive bearing on this issue here. So I would like to, but also because budget support is a new instrument from the institute to come to us, to go directly into the support when there is a gap because of financial crisis, prompted the triggers from outside our individual domain, but also at the same time within. So external shocks. So I'm very supportive of this because it's helped not only to come within the framework of budget, because the budget will link up to the sector priorities and also national priorities. It's us who decide where the money should go into. And also at the same time, in terms of developing the targets, we have to develop database. For example, in the energy sector, we started off, we have a baseline, we have a leakages on our energy network about 15%. So once we have that baseline, we try to improve incrementally every 2 years, 2% every year. And that's the target set. So at the same time is the cultures of accountability for results is developed and encouraged. And I think there's a good impact because it's linked to whatever resource we have, it should be linked up to the result that actually produced. And I think that's what the donors are also after. So I think that's the using the budget, I think success in terms of improving efficiency and also in terms of effectiveness. So it's complementary the effort that we have domestically. I think lesson learned from here, I think we do notice, there are some problem issues. Some of the donors actually changed the term and condition of the grant. They changed from 100% grant to 50% planting grant and credit. And I think this is some of the issues that was brought up to attention without warning. I think that is the lesson we learned from here. I think that donors should be able to inform and not create surprises, bad surprises, when we try to settle with the system. I think that's the lesson. And I think also say that there seems to be a commitment from both parties to come together and to improve things and to get the things better. So thank you very much, ESCAP, for effort in trying to increase the leverage for ODA flows, and also from our responsibility of recipient countries to do our best to make sure we use the resources for better results. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very interesting thoughts, and clearly leveraging quick dispersing assistance for budget has undergone a lot of reflections internationally. And I see your point that if the aid is integrated in the main budget, then there is an overall accountability of flow that results in effectiveness of the use of the resources. So with this, let me now turn to our third panelist, Govindaraj Pokhrel. I would like to invite you to share your thoughts on the role of development cooperation in creating incentives for sustainable development, because I know that it's important that we focus more on the use of existing natural resources and try to be more effective in allocating the domestic as well as external funds in LDCs and LLDCs in the post-2015 era. So I'd very much like to hear your thoughts on this dimension. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, Your Excellencies, respected delegates, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to refer your statement, as you said that this development aid is going to be reduced slowly, and we can expect after 2015, when we are trying to graduate from LDCs or least developed countries, we need more resources. So this scarcely available development cooperation should be used to, especially to design the mechanism, incentive mechanism, so that the more private sector's investment can happen. I can also quote your inaugural speech. You said that transport, energy, ICT, and knowledge development or knowledge transfer. And similar echoes was there in Nepal yesterday when Honorable Prime Minister of India visited Nepal, and he also said HIT means highway information and transmission line. So it's a regional cooperation. The resources we receive from development cooperation should be used to design or plan in such a way that we will have a more regional connectivity, connecting markets and developing markets so that our natural resources can have access to beyond border. Because until now, the resources that we receive from development cooperation are being used in confined within our borders, within our boundaries. But markets are not within our boundaries. For example, I can quote, we have huge potential of hydropower resources. The development aid or cooperation we receive in our countries can be utilized from Afghanistan to Myanmar. If we utilize our development cooperation to develop that incentive mechanism so that the private sector investment, whether it's national or international, can come to Nepal, and then we can utilize our own resources. So that's why these resources are to be utilized or need to be utilized to plan to develop regional connectivity. Whether if you want to develop highways by getting loan or anything from like MDBs, then you should help countries or the private sector to plan accordingly so that these highways are built regionally. I can quote like that, if Nepal is a landlocked country, if we import something from outside, from Bombay to Nepal, it's very expensive. If we build highways in Nepal, so that we should know that what India is doing. So that can be help, that we should get support from development partners to plan accordingly so that the investment can happen. And also to build, your support can build also knowledge hub or knowledge transfer. That's something that has been done, for example, in Bhutan, can be also replicated in Nepal. And that can be financed by development cooperation so that the transaction cost for the countries or transaction cost for the private sector will be reduced. And that is the incentive mechanism, because we cannot expect the conventional way of getting fund and incentivizing infrastructure development by ourselves or by development aid. And also one of the major hurdles is capacity in the sector. Because of not having enough capacity, it's a transaction cost or cost per unit production is expensive for private sector. And if you build the capacity of sector, then the cost per unit production will be less. So development cooperation should focus on that part so that the private sector's production cost will be reduced. So that is a new way of providing incentive for the private sector. And also, many people are unemployed in our countries. There are many SMEs who are utilizing natural resources, our own resources. We can provide enough job if we upscale existing SMEs. Because rather than creating new SMEs, it takes a long time and you need to invest lots of resources. But there are traditional handicrafts, they are exporting many things. So these types of SMEs need to be scaled up by designing and devising clear-cut incentive mechanism. We can provide a small incentive, training or capacity building or design of their product so that they can scale it up and they can immediately absorb huge unemployed masses in these countries. So these types of incentive mechanism has to be developed. And another hurdle or facing is that because I used to say that private sector and government in LDCs are like oil and water. They never mix. So the development cooperation support should come to avoid that barrier so that the public-private partnership mechanism has to be more elaborated, more concretized, so that the government and private sector can participate, because no foreign investment can happen without ensuring their profit. And that can be assured by the government if they participate in investment. So that type of incentive mechanism has to be there, where more private companies or private investment can come, whether FDI or local investment, together with the government. So PPP mechanism has to be elaborated and has to be developed. And there has to be also a small, like pro-poor public-private partnership type of projects, small projects. You start some pilots and you prove that it is going to happen, then private sector can incorporate that system into. So that is also a new way of incentivizing private sector so that they don't have to reinvest or invest some resource and development. That can be achieved through development cooperation so that private sector will have ready-made product to produce and bring into the market. And also another incentive mechanism is to develop new way of financing. The conventional way of financing or from commercial bank is not happening, not supporting the bottom of the pyramid people. So you need to have some sort of mechanism. Maybe it's different. It's maybe in Bangladesh something is working which may not work in Nepal. So it's a country-specific financing mechanism has to be developed so that the bottom of the pyramid people can also get access to finance. And that is also incentive mechanism. So my point is, rather than focusing conventional way of subsidizing infrastructure, subsidizing huge transport mechanism, support LDCs to reform so that the incentive, and it will reduce the transaction cost, it will reduce the transportation cost, and it will support in planning so that the cost of production will be less. And one last point is like sensitize, especially the mountainous countries, help them to plan so that they can move towards a green path. Because I can quote like many mountainous countries are here, Bhutan, Nepal, Afghanistan, Pakistan, part of the India, Myanmar, because we are very clean. We never damage environment by polluting, or we don't have any fossil fuel. So we are zero carbon. Actually, our development is zero carbon-based development. So we should tag ourselves that our economy is zero carbon-based economy. So, and these mountainous countries need special support, special package of incentive to plan accordingly so that in future our products are produced in zero carbon country, manufactured in zero carbon country, and designed in zero carbon country, so that we'll have one of our own branding in international market and we can sell. So that is also another incentive package for these countries. Thank you.
Very good perspectives, and I must say you have covered a lot of, a very broad range of ideas, and based on Nepal's experience, I'm really impressed by the zero carbon achievement of Nepal. Let me now turn to His Excellency Mr. Solom Chai Komaseth. You played a significant role as the chair of LLDC group in having the Vientiane consensus endorsed by the 69th session of the Commission, which was, of course, the Asia-Pacific regional input to the global final review of the Almaty Program of Action, now scheduled for November 2014 in Vienna. What are your thoughts on the role of development cooperation, particularly in catalyzing infrastructure financing, which has been talked about, to turn landlocked developing countries into land-linked developed countries? So I would very much call on your thoughts on this, because this is a very important area. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary. Well, I have to return to the basic, because special needs and problem of landlocked developing countries cannot address only by the landlocked developing countries. This is basic, and I think this is well known for everybody. It requires two things. First, in order to address special need and problem of landlocked developing countries, it requires cooperation from their transit neighbors. It is very important because all goods, all trades would go through their transit neighbors. Secondly, it requires support from international community, that is development partners. Why? Some development partners are far away from landlocked developing countries and transit, which are in the sub-region or in the region. This is because many of landlocked developing countries are least developed countries, and at the same time, many transit neighbors are least developed countries. And least developed countries are put in a very difficult situation to help each other, especially in infrastructure development. Therefore, it requires development cooperation from development partners. Second thing which I would like to address here is what kind of development cooperation do we need as a landlocked developing countries? I think implementation of Almaty Program of Actions has already demonstrated how and what kind of development cooperation. We have 5 priority areas there that need support from international community. However, a lot has been done, a lot has been achieved, but still many things needs to be enhanced, needs to be accelerated in order to address the special needs and problem of landlocked developing countries. Therefore, what kind of development cooperation we need? We need, I would like to stress, general partnership, commitment from international community. Because unless we have that, we would not be able to address the needs of landlocked developing countries. I just want to compare one statistic. For one container to transport from landlocked developing countries to final destination, to the world market, it spends $3,000, whereas transit neighbors or transit developing countries spend only 50% of that. If any landlocked developing countries spend 10% of their goods, of their earning from their goods in international markets, other would not spend that amount of money. So I think that's a general partnership in development cooperation would be crucial, especially in the area of infrastructure development, meaning address the infrastructure development gap within landlocked developing countries and transit neighbors. Another thing which I would like to raise here is regional cooperation and connectivity, which is crucial because landlocked developing countries are located in different continents and have different specificity. For our region, we are in a fortunate situations than other landlocked developing countries in Africa. For instance, in Asia, we have, like for instance, in Laos, we are working under the Greater Mekong sub-regions in order to improve infrastructure development, road, transport system. And we also have working under the ASEAN community, which next year ASEAN would declare ASEAN Economic Community. So infrastructure development has been a priority for us. Therefore, I think as a landlocked developing countries, to turn from a landlocked into a landlink, that would benefit not only landlocked developing countries, but also benefit the region as a whole. So, in order to achieve this goal, I think it is important that investment from private sectors or public sectors should be enhanced. And we understand that investment in landlocked developed countries is not so attractive to private investor. Therefore, in this context, it is important that a funding or a special fund for infrastructure development for landlocked developing countries should be established in order to sensitize the investors to invest in landlocked developing countries. Thank you, Madam.
Coverage. Let me now turn to our final speaker, Mr. Acharya. As I pointed out earlier in my remarks, we would very much value your reflecting of what's new and what are the emerging global partnerships in the post-2015 development agenda, and what implications these have for our special needs countries. So over to you, Mr. Acharya.
Thank you very much, Madam Executive Secretary. I think we have heard very extensively the importance of development cooperation from among all the participants. I think these are very informative. Before going into the new partnership, I'd just like to say a couple of words on the old one, I mean the traditional one as well, because there is an organic relationship between the development cooperation and many of the new resources that we are talking about. Yes, there is a very big concern at the global level that, as you said in the beginning, the international commitment on ODA has not been fulfilled, and we are nowhere near fulfillment of that. It is just half. I mean, there has been some improvement this year, 2013. There is a small uptick. Still, it is $135 billion, which is 0.3. We are just in the half mark for the development cooperation. That's a constant concern. Now, when you hear all the comments and when you try to see that from the lens of the post-2015 development agenda and compare that with the MDG progress, now we see the whole gamut of areas that we are trying to cover at the international level. If you look at all the countries, LDCs, small islands, and the LLDCs, the progress in MDG have been very limited. So there is a long way to go in terms of the health, education, and poverty alleviation, and hunger, and all that. That will still occupy a lot of energy, a lot of resources, and a lot of attention among the LLDCs, and SIDS. Secondly, when you look at the post-2015 development agenda, we have now added the economic growth pillars, which includes infrastructure, that is what we are talking about, industrialization, and then, of course, access to energy, which is a very important issue for all these countries that has not come out. And then the high cost of building energy facility, building infrastructure, and building productive capacity, or whether you call it productivity enhancement. And the Minister of Cambodia was talking about the factories and then the markets. And the third, of course, we have to do in a way that we also protect our natural capital and then also deal with the climate change and other impacts. That means The area that we are trying to cover by post-2015 is going to be much wider and much deeper than before, and two, the capacity of the countries and the resource of these countries is very limited. Therefore, ODA commitment will be critical for all these countries, because the when you look at the the resource generation in the LDC, we have that statistics. Average revenue from the tax is about 12, 13, 14% of total revenue, GDP, and that's very, very low. And then when you look at the gap, the investment gap, and which at least if you need to really have a 7% growth rate for LDCs or similar growth rate, you need at least 25-30% of the investment, and you don't have that. So their dependence on ODA will continue to remain for the time being. But when I say that, when you look at the agenda of the post-2015, the requirement would be much higher than what we have now. Even if ODA is fulfilled, then in terms of the the resources, from 135 billion, maybe it will be, as I said, $300 billion. But when you look at the requirement, the infrastructure building we have heard, the vulnerability that we have heard from the states countries, especially when they have to deal with the impact of the climate change and the ocean acidification. And then we have heard the challenges of productive capacity building, and then of course the economic growth and infrastructure and access to energy. The requirement would be so much that the ODA will not be enough. Therefore, I think what we discussed in the post-2015 is that even for the least developed countries, even for the small islands, even for the landlocked developing countries, we have to look at technology issues, we have to look at investment issues, we have to look at trade issues, and we have to look at the multi-stakeholder global partnership. And the PPP is part of that as well, and as well as the South-South cooperation. All need to be really strengthened, enhanced, and made coherent so that each will support the other. I think that's the key to our discussion for making the post-2015 development agenda more successful. Now, we talk about green economy, we talk about protecting our resources, finding a new way of dealing with all of that, low carbon and all of that, the greener economy. How can we do that if we don't have the necessary mechanism to have access to new technologies? It cannot happen. So there has to be a way to make sure that the technology, innovation, and science plays a very important role in the new economy that we are all aiming at. But the capacity constraint is limited, and the transfer of technology is very much limited. There has to be a way to deal with that. So the post-2015 must ensure that the mechanism is there, it is supported, it is helped by the international community for these countries. Secondly, we talk about investment. Yes, I mean, I was just looking at some of the statistics. LDCs, one example I'm just giving, same thing applies to the LLDCs as well as the small island developing states. LDCs have 900+ million people. There are 48 countries. The total in investment last year, the year before, was just $20 billion. Now, you can imagine, and if you take the 5 countries out, the natural resources, the country rich in natural resources, I'm thinking of Mozambique, Angola, and all of that, then what are you left with? 43 countries, $10 billion is invested. That's not enough. Therefore, what we are discussing in New York and many other capitals is that what could be the other ways to incentivize FDI going into these countries? What are the modalities? Is there ODA which can leverage? Is there blending that we can do it better than before? Is there a way that the home country measures in the developed country themselves can look at the modalities whereby they will take part of that, the part of the risk related to going into these markets? I think that's the way. If the risk has to be minimized, enabling environment, of course, these countries have to create. There has to be a better development of the private sector. We heard that. There has to be a better development of the rules and regulation, transparency, good governance. They are very important. But even if you have all the facilities given, look at the LDCs, LLDCs, and states countries' investment regimes. They are most welcoming. They are most liberal. But still, you think about the statistics, and this is very, very low. Therefore, what we are really trying to look at is that how best we can use the ODA. How can we use the mechanisms, create a new mechanism whereby they can also incentivize, and they can also make sure that the home country measures are taken to promote the investment. I think that would be another one. And then finally, on the trade sector, of course, we have again heard that when you look at the capacity of these countries, there is a limited supply side and productive capacity. That is one challenge. But even if they have whatever supply side and the productive capacity, the market access is a big issue, the rules of origin is a big issue, non-tariff measures are a big issue, and of course, lately, of course, especially when you look at the opening of the, the implementation of the DF-QF level is very much limited for these countries. Now, only 83%, 84% market is given to them. So, finally, I would like to say that what we are therefore really looking at in the post-2015 is that we have to take all these resources together. We have to use the private sector. There is a lot of money out there. They have to really make full use of in order to bring about a change. Requirement is big, but there are opportunities. We have to deal with the systemic issues, and we have to make sure that they are coherent, and we have to have a strong monitoring and accountability, so that we just don't go the way that we have been going on with the MDG. There will be a real change in the lives of people, everyone, but of course those who are in the least developed, landlocked, and the small island developing states must. Thank you very much.
I'm sure you'll all agree that we have heard a diverse set of views, but they are all kind of coherent and consistent because they are jiving together. I think without wasting further time, trying to sum up at this stage, I would like to take a number of questions from the floor and also from our online participants. For those of you joining us via social media, remember to send your questions to @UNESCAP and use the hashtag CS70. Once we have all those questions, we will ask our panelists to respond. So let me give some time to the social media to come with questions, but in the meantime, let me open the floor here for questions to our panelists. What would be good is if the questions are short and to the point, and if you can designate, you can indicate which panelist you are putting the question, but if not, then we'll ask one of the panelists to respond. So with this, over to the floor. I recognize the delegate from Bangladesh.
Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary, and I would like to thank all the panelists for their very clear and excellent presentation and viewpoint of a very critical issue of ODA. And ever since I believe that we left the university, and even in the university days, the issue of development assistance had been a major focus of our discussion. So, and if we come to the presentation by Ambassador Acharya, it certainly is going to remain a debatable issue. Now, the focus on development assistance is perhaps skewed in the way that it is being focused that assistance has not been up to the commitment, and how do we ensure that the commitment is being made. But now another dimension has got added to it, is that assistance is not enough. We need to be channelized for capacity development in terms of infrastructure development, in terms of productive capacities. Now, the piece of the cake remains as small as it is and gets smaller by the day. And now we are adding this dimension that we would need to channelize is for infrastructure development. How realistic is that remains questionable, in the sense that the assistance which had so far been channelized is for the social sector, in health, in education, in capacity development. And if we take away, keeping that the piece of the cake as it is, whether it would be a very practical approach to do that. If not, then we are also listing that Asia Pacific is now a reservoir of huge resources. It has accumulated billions of dollars and is intending also to channelize for infrastructure development. How that can be done is something that I would request the panelists to indicate whether the resources that has been accumulated in Asia Pacific would be a better way to approach for infrastructure development. This is one point that I would like to seek your views. And I fully agree with Ambassador Chandracharya of all the dimensions that we will have to look at in the post-2015 scenario would remain. And one specific question that I would like to request to respond to panelist Excellency Govind Pokharel is and this comes from our own cooperation in South Asia and in the regional and sub-regional context, where we are looking at the connectivity issues. We are also looking at other trade facilitations issues. How do you think sub-regional cooperation, sir, could play an effective role in addressing poverty issues and reducing poverty in South Asian LDCs? Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary.
Okay, I'm going to take 3 questions at a time and then ask the panelists to respond. So let me turn to delegate from Bhutan.
Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary. I shall heed your advice to be brief and to the point, as I intend to be in your good books, continue to intend to be in your good books, ma'am. May I begin my comment? My question actually is directed to His Excellency Mr. Komasit, but allow me to put in a few comments. The Almaty Program of Action has contributed to universal acknowledgement of special needs and challenges of LLDCs and generated tangible support for infrastructure development, trade facilitation, ODA and FDI. Despite encouraging progress, persistent challenges compounded by negative impact of climate change have adversely impacted our socio-economic progress. As we have maintained yesterday, my delegation is with a view that APOA remains an unfinished agenda. LLDCs have a long way to go in fully benefiting from the globalization, achieving sustained and inclusive economic growth, sustainable development, poverty eradication, employment generation, and structural transformation. In this regard, we look forward to the convening of the second UN Conference of LLDC in Vienna from 3 to 5 November 2014, a few months down the line, the outcome of which must find reflection in the elaboration of the post-2015 development agenda. My question then is to Your Excellency, Mr. Komaset. Your Excellency, you have provided strong and indeed very constructive contribution in crafting the Vientiane Consensus. What is your take on the next program of action for the LLDCs that is going to be adopted in the second UN conference in Vienna that I referred to above? Thank you very much.
Okay, I recognize the delegate from Kiribati.
Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary. I'll also be very brief. But first of all, I'd like to also thank the distinguished panelists for sharing their views and perspectives on the important issues regarding the importance of ODA. My question will be directed to the Honorable Minister of Finance of Tonga. And the question is, since our meeting in Apia in September, how do you think the outcome of the conference will address the aid effectiveness issue? Thank you.
Maybe I'll take another question from our delegate of Kazakhstan before we open, before we get to the response.
Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary. Our questions to His Excellency Mr. Acharya. As you know, the intra-regional trade among Central Asian LDC is rather low, approximately 5%. Is it due to lack of trade complementarity of constraints not allowing to tap the potential? Thank you.
I see one more flag, so since we just have one more flag, let me turn to our colleague from India. Okay, sorry, I can't see from a distance here. Please.
Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary. My delegation would like to thank all panelists for their perspective on the subject. India is committed to extend all possible development support to LDCs, LLDCs and SEEDs countries under its Technical and Economic Cooperation Program called ITEC and other bilateral programs. India has focused its cooperation with these countries on human and institutional capacity building and infrastructure development. During the Istanbul conference, India has enhanced the credit line facility to US $1 billion from US $500 million, which was announced during the India LDC Ministerial Conference. India is also extending support to LDC activities on like a follow-up of Istanbul conference, for which we have announced US $5 million. Also for the LLDCs, we are contributing $100,000 US for organizing review conference on LLDCs. As a symbol to our support to SEEDs, India is contributing a sum of $250,000 for organizing the third SEEDs conference and its preparatory meetings. We look forward to like a third SEEDs international conference where we would like to strengthen our engagement with the group. My question is to address to Minister from Cambodia, who is the chairman of the National Committee for ESCAP from Cambodia. Excellency, you have talked about the role of private sector in your economy. What plans do you have in attracting additional FDI to supplement your domestic private sector participation in your economy? Thank you.
With these questions, I will now open, I will now request our panelists. I think rather than identify who should do what, I would give an opportunity to all the panelists to tackle the questions. There have been some specific questions to the panelists. So with this, let me first turn to Mr. Pokhraj, since he has raised his hand.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. As His Excellency from Bangladesh asked a question regarding the regional cooperation to uplift or to boost the economic activities or economic progress in LDC or landlocked countries. I think there is a good example from South Asia itself. If we jointly plan and mobilize investment, especially on the energy sector, like Bangladesh needs lots of energy and we have lots of energy resources in Nepal, which are not yet tapped fully. So if we have a sort of collaboration between us, like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan and Nepal, then plan accordingly to have mobilized investment. Investment within region, like India can invest a lot, or Bangladesh also can invest a lot. Maybe Nepal may not able to provide its own investment to fulfill those demands. So there has to be some sort of regional collaboration and cooperation mechanism, like it was initiated by USAID support a few years ago, SARI, South Asia Energy Initiative. A similar type of cooperation or collaboration, also support from the partner outside, like other development partner or MDBs or bilateral partner. They can also sensitize us, motivate us, also support us to have that type of cooperation. So that, because energy is also now commodity. So that type of mechanism we need to develop ourselves so that the resources available in both countries or in countries among us can be shared for the benefit of the people. That there has to be some sort of a collaboration. Without our own collaboration that attracts investment. Because we are a bit, in South Asia, we are a bit pro-nationalistic. But I was happy to hear the speech of Modi yesterday. Especially I'm happy that the anti-India capital is now vanishes in Nepal because of the Modi's speech. So it's so nice, like regional collaboration and cooperation is also coming politically driven and politically motivated. This is the right time that we have Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and this we have SAARC, and we can mobilize that network, and we can seek support if we cannot have our own understanding from the development partner to plan our infrastructure. Like there is only 17-kilometer distance between Bangladesh and Nepal, and we have huge amount of energy and agricultural products in Nepal that can be supplied to India or Bangladesh and vice versa. So we need to have a cooperation on trade, commerce, and also we need to have a knowledge transferring or knowledge sharing hub. Like energy access program in Nepal and Bangladesh is very successful. Your microfinance is also very successful. It can be copied by like energy access program in Pakistan can be replicated in Pakistan, especially the off-grid solutions, which are being successful in Nepal. And microfinance experience can be shared in other countries or from Bangladesh. So this can actually elevate our, I used to avoid word poverty elevation. I request all LDDC not to use word poverty elevation. Development is not for poverty elevation, because if you use that terminology, then no private sector investment will come. So rather than using word poverty elevation, we should say that moving towards the economic prosperity. So we need investment to move towards the economic prosperity, not poverty elevation. That is all old words. So because who will come and invest to elevate our poverty? Nobody will come. So let's use terminology moving towards economic prosperity by mobilizing investment, whether our own investment, regional investment, or investment from our side. So that's there has to be a good regional cooperation among us, which is also politically driven, because you need political support for that. And how to attract investment in our infrastructure, that is also a very good question, because without, like, I can give you one good example for a transmission line is also one infrastructure. If there is a power trade agreement between Nepal and India, or among us, Bangladesh, and even up to Sri Lanka, then there will be huge investment for infrastructure development in transmission line, because Nepal alone can generate more than 50,000 megawatts of hydropower. So then there will be huge investment in Nepal, in Bhutan, and other countries, mountainous countries. Once you have some sort of regional cooperation, collaboration, then the people will invest in transmission line or hydropower. So a framework or an enabling environment has to be there to attract investment, because investment will not be there without profit. So we cannot beg to invest in huge infrastructure where there is no profit. So in my country also we are planning to have a fast track road, but no investment is coming because people are not realizing that there is a profit because of not having enabling environment. So that type of, once you have a good environment, because I saw that in Pakistan also very huge investment is happening in highways, because they have good, at least they manage to have good environment so that the investor can get profit, big highways. So before finishing my thing, because I raised the issue of zero carbon, I should clarify what is this. It's like I can give example, especially colleague from Bhutan. We are emitting less than 0.001% per capita, ton per capita. So we have resources. What our agriculture is purely biological. We are using very less amount of pesticides. It's not dependent on any fossil fuel. Agriculture is totally manual and renewable. And our energy resources, hydropower, whether it's solar energy, all are environment friendly, zero carbon. Third one is our tourism. It's all mountainous based, trekking. So no environmental damaging activities are there. So all these mountainous countries, they have three resources: energy, whether hydropower or solar energy, agriculture, purely agro-based agriculture, biological, non-pesticides, non-fossil fuel based, and tourism, which is purely mountainous trekking. And so these are the three resources that are available in our country and comparative advantage. We don't have to compete with big neighbors, India and China, because it's our own resources. We can compete with them. And the investment we can attract without harming environment. So that's we can build our economy based on the zero carbon. That's why I said, because we can have economic growth without investing on fossil fuel, rather than generating lots of renewable energy resources, which is based on zero carbon. That's why we are going to tag our LDC graduation with zero carbon economy of Nepal. Thank you.
Okay, let me now start from here on this side. Yes, please.
Thank you,
May
Madam.
I recommend we keep short
Yes,
responses,
I
because we
promise.
have another few questions coming
Yes,
from
thank
Twitter.
I just wanted to respond to the questions raised by Distinguished Ambassador of Bhutan. Firstly, I totally agree with you that Almaty Program of Action is an unfinished business. So we have to continue to enhance implementation of Almaty Program of Action. On the take that you was asking me, what take should I have for the second conference on LDCs? I would offer three takes. One, a greater commitment from the part of development partners. It is a must for us, because without this, least landlocked developing countries would not be able to address its special needs problem. Secondly, I think we need concrete measures on active engagement and responsibility of private sector in infrastructure development and transport service. This is very important. Private sectors play a crucial role in addressing the special need and problem of landlocked developing countries. And thirdly, we need more and comprehensive follow-up mechanism in the implementation, because Almaty Program of Action show us what is the weakness and strength. So we need to enhance the follow-up mechanism to make sure that all the targets, the actions that we adopted be fully and comprehensively and effectively implemented. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. May I ask Your Excellency from Tonga?
Thank you very much, Madam
You had
Chair.
some ideas.
Just responding to questions been asked by the distinguished High Commissioner from Gilbert, asking about the outcome of the conference, SIDS conference in Apia in September, in terms of addressing the issue of aid effectiveness. I think there are about 3 or 2 main highlights, I think, that this SIDS conference will generate. One of it is basically the stressing or emphasis on the building of capacity, national capacity, and institutions to strengthen the goal of realizing national ownership and also national citizenship in terms of management of the aid and delivery of the aid programs. Even though that has been the case for several years, but I think it's coming back again, given the lesson we have learned in terms of investment in strengthening of the national systems because of ownership. And also noting in the Pacific the frequency and increasing uses of budget support, direct budget support, and also the joint programming and also administration of the aid programs. I think that is emerging development that we are welcome, and I think that is also one of the emphasis and highlight in the upcoming conference. And also the acceptance of increasing usage of technical assistance provided by various agencies from development agencies, not only involving the United Nations but also other development partners in terms of the comparative advantage provide technical assistance to respond to specific needs of the member countries. And I realize that Kiribati is also is now discussing the possibility of having this kind of technical assistance for reviewing the midterm review of your national plan. And I think having these diverse skills from diverse institutions, I think, will help to alleviate or relieve the burden on the capacity of a national system to provide these kinds of important undertaking. And also, I think, in addition to national ownership and system, there will be also an emphasis on strengthening of regional and sub-regional coordinations. I think you also realize that Pacific Forum countries have already approved the compact, whereby the member countries is going to have internal peer reviewing of the national plan and also budgetary systems. So within the member countries, one can conduct a peer review of others and vice versa. And I think that is the kind of partnership I think will be emphasized and stressed to undertake going forward. And also the recent meeting in Barao of the head of states of Pacific countries also endorsed the Pacific regional framework, which of course replaced the Pacific plan that we had the past few years, calling for greater political will for advancing the agenda of regional integrations in our side of the world. And I think that will be renewed interest and renewed call for member countries to strengthen the South and South partnership. Also, I think it's very important, I think the calling for assistance for member countries to address the issues of accessing to global financial facilities in terms of increasing voice and participations. And I know that ESCAP and also other institutions help in this particular issue. So it will have to create it or have a streamlined mechanism so that able member countries to draw from global financial facility for investment in our respective countries. At the same time, I think also calling for improvement and strengthening of monitoring and accountabilities. There's another area I think that Samoa Pathway will emphasize, which emphasize to have accountability mechanisms that could see very clear linkages between the national, regional, and also sub-regional and regional and global systems. I think the linkages of these kind of systems, I think there will be an emphasis to see they are all aligned and produce desired result for all of the member countries. And also, I think the last one, but not the least, is important for more investment on improving of the statistical administration in our small island developing states. I think there's a recurring theme, and I think there will be more emphasis, because when we move toward accountability for result, I think it's very important to have a sound statistical database. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to Mr. Toch because there was a question on private sector role. Yeah.
Thank you. I thank you for the question from our delegate from India. I want to say a few words about how to attract an FDI to supplement our domestic private sector in Cambodia. Besides our liberal investment law that provide, that offer incentives, tax exemptions to our investors, local as well as foreign investors, we have four key factors for investors in Cambodia. First one is political stability. We need to ensure that Cambodia is safe and stable politically in order to attract investors. Second factor is macroeconomic stability, that the investor feel confident in the way to run businesses, that we offer stable currency exchange, our GDP growth is maintained and growing. So this is important. The third factor is the the government has to offer sound and transparent legal framework for investors. Our government has been doing this for the past 15 years, and we set up a government private sector forum that takes place every 6 months. And the forum chaired by the Prime Minister and the full cabinet ministers are there, and we work on questions and weaknesses, problem that face, challenges that faced by investors. So we solve this problem every 6 months, we meet that. But before that forum, we have also a working group, joint working group. We set up 9 joint working group, and each working group co-chaired by one representing private sector and another one by the minister in charge. Working group on agriculture and agro industry, working group on tourism, working group on manufacturing and distribution, legislation, taxations, working group on energy, infrastructure, transport, etc., etc. And then number 9, we just set up a new working group on paddy rice. So these working groups are co-chaired by the cabinet member and the private sector. They work on those difficult challenges that they face, and then they cannot solve the problem at that level. They bring up the issues and challenges to the forum that chaired by the Prime Minister and cabinet ministers are there, and they solve the problem. So all these are plans that we're doing, and we try to improve the mechanism to facilitate the work of private sectors in Cambodia by providing also a very sound and transparent legal framework to them. Thank you for that.
Mr. Acharya, any questions that you want to tackle?
No, there were two particular questions.
But two particular that...
Yeah. The one was by distinguished ambassador of Bangladesh. How do we really attract investment and also use the ODA and other money when you have not fulfilled the ODA commitment? That was the question. No, I think there are 2-3 things that we are still discussing with the development partners. One, what we are discussing is that the current allocation that's what Madam Executive Secretary also said, the current allocation is not fair, so it should go more to those countries where it is needed most. So that will perhaps enhance the allocation of ODA going to the those countries that we are talking about. The other issue that we are also looking at is that it's not the size of the amount that would be used for attracting investment that counts. It is accompanying the investment by the guarantee, which is not necessarily all the time coming from ODA. We have seen many people doing that. In Netherlands does that, the Germans and others who are also encouraging, trying to do that. They just reserve certain amount of money which will be used as a guarantee, but against that they can invest in some other countries. So it is a kind of a risk sharing by the government through holding some amount of money, but not necessarily ODA. So we are looking at many of the different modalities. I think that's really, we hope that will really look at that. The other thing that we are also looking at is the South-South cooperation. Of course, the modality of cooperation of South-South is different than the North-South. There's nothing like a commitment of the North. It has to be supplement. But if you look at the South-South, it is already now $14-15 billion last year when you look at that. So it is growing. But in terms of the investment, you are saying the other question, which is about how to really attract, when there is a huge reserve in Asia, then how can you find a way to attract it? I do hope that the China has announced this Asian Infrastructure Bank. We do hope that those who have this type of money could also come out with this idea and give more priority to the investment in those countries where infrastructure is limited, access to energy is limited, productive capacity investment, but there is a huge opportunity. In terms of reducing poverty, of course the poverty has to be used, the word, but of course building the base of the economic growth, I think that is in the best interest of each country, because it will promote ultimately the trade as well as the prosperity among all the countries of the world. And there was a question about Kazakhstan, from the delegation of Kazakhstan about Central Asia. Yes, I mean, I was in Kazakhstan very recently, and I know that there has been a huge investment in terms of development of infrastructure in whole of Central Asia, but leading role played by Kazakhstan. I'm fully aware of that. But I think there are a couple of issues that still has to be dealt with, because the infrastructure linkages is still a very big challenge. Although it is a very good policy that you have started, the reviving the old Silk Road, but also creating logistics hubs and development corridors, not only the transportation, I think this is a very important initiative. But when you look at the cross-border connectivity, that is still an issue between all the countries, because you have a long-range plan, we know that, but that will perhaps help. But you also need a strong political will to really interact and facilitate the time it takes to cross the border. You may have the hard infrastructure, but if the soft infrastructure is not there, in terms of harmonization of rules, in terms of the custom procedures, in terms of the goods and the products that you have. Secondly, I would also say the complementarity of the, I mean, most of the countries in South Central Asia produce very similar products, and it's all primary and commodity driven, hydrocarbon and commodity driven, and that's also a problem. So once you have a little bit more diversification, more, the opening of trading road with a strong political will among all the Central Asian countries, and then the facilitation of border, trading times, as well as the efficiency in at the borders, I'm sure that the Central Asian has a huge opportunity in terms of being in the three major countries around the world, Russia, China, and India around. So I would say, and then one more thing, I think I would also like to say that when you look at the World Bank business report, yes, when you look at the Kazakhstan's once, the doing business, it is way, I think, around 50, 51. But when you look at the doing trade in Central Asia, all the Central Asian countries, including other landlocked developed countries, are almost at the bottom. So that's a big challenge that we all have to really deal with. And this is one of the issues that the Ambassador was talking about: efficiency, effectiveness, the time, and the money it takes to cross the border. It's not only the distance. He was talking about, the $3,000 that one has to pay from the landlocked, and $1,500. And Kazakhstan is one example of that. I think you have 3,300 or 400 kilometers from nearest from the sea, and that's a big challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you'll all agree that our panelists have done a great job in responding to all the questions. Their job is, of course, not finished as yet, because we have 4 questions from the via Twitter, and I'm going to indulge in identifying who should respond to those questions to save time, because I think we are running a little tight on time. So we don't know where this Twitter question came from, because location was not specified. The first question is, how to attract increasing aid flows to Asia-Pacific LDCs that receive disproportional aid compared to the number of its poor? Minister of Tonga.
Right. I think we have discussed how we can address other means of financing to go into improving a productive capacity and also infrastructures. And I think there are some countries now in Asia who are now providing, because of liquidity availability in Asia, I think there are some of them coming and providing some concessional loans. But I think our discussion here identifies specific issue, even though central to them are in infrastructure and also human capital, developing human capital, in order to create innovative, system to make use, of the technology available, which of course quite a huge gap between developed and developing countries, and also more so for these developing countries. And I think probably we need a combinations of FDI, also concessional financing, and also a new innovative facilities, which of course we have heard from our colleague from New York, which is not the first time, but has been discussed several years back, but we haven't seen it, come into fruition. But I think that is a kind of facility in order to improve and lift the performance of the least developed countries, in order to get closer and close the gap between developed and developing countries. And I think that's what I'm saying here. And I think part of our discussion here is to develop some sort of strategy post 2015 development to address these bottlenecks. Thank you.
Politics of aid allocation is very complex. That would be my short answer to that. The second question is, and maybe Mr. Pokral, if I can raise it with you, but later on we can go back to others if they have any other thoughts. This question is from Bangkok, Thailand. What benefits other countries would gain from the special fund for investment assistance for LLDCs? What benefits other countries would gain from the special fund for investment assistance for LLDCs? I'll ask you the same question.
I mean, other countries means non-LDC or LDC countries?
Well, non-LLDCs
Yeah.
is what I think it means.
I think it's a indirect benefit is there. For example, if we invest in, for example, in energy or in infrastructure, getting aid, actually investment in LDCs comes from the non-LDCs countries most of the time. For example, if it's a question from Thailand, if Thailand company comes to Nepal to investment in hydropower, if we leverage that investment by mobilizing this LDCs fund, then certainly the business opportunity for these non-LDCs countries is increased in LDC countries. So you have to see that it's a win-win situation. Giving money to LDCs through a special fund is not only going to help LDCs, but also increasing the market for the non-LDCs investors, or whether it's from the Europe or from Thailand. So this is a win-win situation. Actually, creating market in LDCs means also getting indirect or direct benefit to the non-LDCs countries.
Thank you. Very good response. From Almaty, Kazakhstan, the question is how to make socio-economic growth of LDCs and LLDCs better linked to the dynamic neighboring states. Question to you, Mr. Comment.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Well, very simple answer. We are living in a globalized society, and no single country can be immune from any impact, any effect. So development in one country can benefit indirectly other countries. So that's very simple answer. Thank you.
Okay. The last question is from New Delhi, and I will ask our colleague from UN. How to bring the severe challenges faced by LDCs and LLDCs in Asia Pacific at the forefront of the future development agenda?
I think when you look at the LDCs and SETs and the future development agenda, as I said in the beginning, I think if we are talking about leaving no one behind, if we are talking about transformative agenda, and if you are talking about creating a prosperity and dignity for all, I think Asia Pacific region has a good candidate. We're just talking about that. We have in Asia Pacific, even under the membership of the ESCAP, more than half of the countries under this special categories with this special situation. So it is only natural that all of them, with their specific vulnerabilities uppermost in mind, whether it is a poverty, climate change, lack of infrastructure and access, I think have a very strong case of really making sure that their agenda gets duly reflected in post-2015 development agenda and they get due benefit out of it. I think there is a very strong case for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and that's a good point. Now, I think since we are drawing close to, if there are no other questions, I could very quickly, briefly summarize, but not cover every element of what we discussed, because you'll all agree that this was a very rich debate and every panel member added value, not only in their 5 minutes presentation in a very effective, succinct manner, but they further answered the questions very competently and hopefully to the satisfaction of the people who were raising questions. Now, first point, my take home was that ODA remains relevant and very significant. So we need to keep the pressure on the donors and those who have not fulfilled their commitment to enhance ODA. And also we heard that a higher proportion of allocation needs to go to these special needs countries. We also heard that not only is the volatility of ODA an issue during crisis, but we have volatility in remittances, which have become a very important source of financing for a number of countries. So we need to think through on sending a message across that migrants that exist in different parts of the world need to have job security to be able to continue remitting their finances for our group of countries. We also heard on ODA that significance of ODA becomes much higher given the growing Sustainable Development Agenda, a point made by Mr. Acharya also. A second strand of discussion that I heard was the approach and tools for giving comfort on development effectiveness to the donors. And I am really grateful to you for sharing the example of Reflex, is what you call it, where a lead agency is identified to assess the country's compliance with a set of structural reforms, plus also strengthening of the financial management and fiscal policy frameworks. And having this allows you an opportunity to mainstream aid through fiscal framework, budgets, and budgets, I understand, have sharper accountabilities at the parliaments, so the effective development effectiveness by virtue of that is illustrated. So that's emphasizing development effectiveness is important, but looking at more innovative mechanisms and more holistic mechanisms for development effectiveness would attract flows and give confidence to the donors on the use of resources. As a side issue, it was very importantly pointed out that donors should not change the terms and conditions midway through. It's very disruptive. So I think it's a very important point. The most important message of this panel is really that we need to look at alternate sources of financing. And amongst the alternate sources of financing, it is important to look at private sector, tapping private sector funding for development. Thus far, private sector has come forward in a number of countries, and it is a pretty dynamic and vibrant private sector of Asia Pacific. But I think getting private sector to invest in development is always a challenge. But there are clearly risks that private sector faces, and they hesitate to invest, I think, in long term in particular, but also in riskier ventures. And because infrastructure is really a long tenure commitment, that we need risk mitigation strategies to be able to leverage private sector. And I think on that count, credit enhancement is a very rich area where everything has been tried, and that needs to be applied very effectively to leverage private sector. To the extent ODA, fiscal resources can be used to leverage, to provide the risk mitigation strategy or credit enhancement would be the way to go forward to leverage private sector. Another very important strand of thought that I was very happy to hear was, how do you facilitate investment in natural resources to allow for cross-border trading as a means to reach markets beyond your smaller markets. And I think this is happening in some countries. Kazakhstan, investments from China to Kazakhstan to lay the pipelines, energy pipelines for transportation of gas and oil is one classic example of how this can be done. In Nepal, of course, how do you leverage hydropower to get across border and reach the markets that bring the export gains for those resources. So in this particular context, it's important that there are two elements. One is, of course, the effective deployment of untapped non-financial resources, i.e. the natural resources, but then how do you really attract investments into those resources to build the necessary infrastructure, both for generation as well as transmission, as I see, is quite critical. And in this context, I think there was a unanimous consensus across the panel that I heard that business environment is quite critical. So you really need to fix all LLDCs, LDCs, SIDS, they all need to uniformly work aggressively to strengthen their business environment, to be able to attract foreign direct investment and private domestic investment in development itself. So I'm not going to go into every little detail, but these were my take home, and I thought we should sum up with this. There will be a much more elaborate summary of this panel by our colleagues, which will be put on our website for your benefit. So with this, I do think that our panelists deserve a pretty heavy duty applause. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for spending the time to share your thoughts. We learned a lot from all of you and look forward to our continued deliberations. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Akhtar, and the distinguished panelists for an insightful and fruitful exchange of ideas on this important topic. Distinguished delegates, this concludes our consideration of Agenda Item 2 on the Special Body on Least Developed, Landlocked Developing, and Pacific Island Developing Countries. We shall continue this committee's deliberations in the afternoon, at which time we will consider Agenda Item 3. But at this juncture, I would like to give the floor to the Secretariat for some administrative and housekeeping announcements.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you bear with us for a few minutes? Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the Secretariat would like to make the following announcements. First, at 2 o'clock sharp this afternoon, the two committees of the whole will take up Item 3, Agenda Item 3, review of substantive issues in parallel with the Committee of the Whole 1 in Conference Room 1 and the Committee of the Whole 2 in Conference Room 2. Both conference rooms are on the same level as this one. And if your delegation likes to speak during this afternoon's deliberations, you are kindly invited to submit your names and written statements to the conference room officers who are stationed in the front part of both conference rooms. A written statement facilitates the work of the interpreters as well as the Secretariat and is very much appreciated. Also, for the delegations that have received invitations for lunch today, there are 3 locations. For member states from South and Southwest Asia, the lunch is in the public foyer. It's on the ground level. For member states of North and Central Asia, it's in the Raja Purik Lounge, which is also on the ground floor. And the third one is for the member states for Southeast Asia, is in the reception hall. All are on the ground level. If you need directions of how to get there, please let our Secretariat staff know. So we will again convene at 2 o'clock sharp, which means that we'll have a reduced lunch break as scheduled. Okay, thank you for your attention.
The meeting is now adjourned.